everybody.
Hello, hello.
Awesome. Glad to see everybody back. And we have shared the agenda in the chat for you because you want to follow the agenda. But I'm super excited today to introduce our speakers for this month. And we're kicking it off really strong and with solid with our speakers from Loyola University and from Operation Restoration. We have Javian. Am I pronouncing the name correctly?
Yes, Javian Baker.
Oh, thanks. Okay, all right. Javian Baker. He's a fellow at the Jesuit Social Research Institute at Loyola University. And Javian, he comes with us with where he provides research support for ongoing and emerging statewide efforts to expand higher education in prisons across Louisiana and nationally. His research and writing interests are at the intersection of anti-Blackness, poverty, policing, social justice, and Black religious thought. He is passionate about working with community members and assisting with programming, support, and communication. We also have Dr. Stephanie Gaskill. She's a fellow also from the Jesuit Research Institute of Loyola University, where she assists with JSRI's prison education program. Stephanie specializes in higher education in prison program administration. She has a passion for working closely with students, faculty, and administrators to create quality programming. And then finally, we have Tracy Pratt. She's the higher education administrator at Operation Restoration, managing higher education programming provided by the organization, including the College in Prison program at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. The College in Prison program is the only in-person secular accredited higher education opportunity available to women incarcerated in Louisiana. And it offers a Bachelor's of Arts in Social Science for women in carceral settings, as well as provides wraparound services to ensure successful reentry for students to continue their studies. Tracy has over 2 decades of experience working with prison and formerly incarcerated populations through her work as post-conviction attorney and various nonprofit roles. She has also worked at university program director and as instructors for adult learners. Super excited. I just got right in because I want to make sure that I give them ample time for their presentation and their great speech. Tracy?
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so excited to be here. I want to give a real shout out to Mickey, who is the tech guy who makes all this happen, but it's also his birthday. So happy birthday, Mickey. I will tell you that when I was first asked to do this, it was in October. And I have a house in Florida that got hit by 3 hurricanes. And so I canceled, and then it was the holidays. And then Mickey said, Tracy, can you do it in January? And he's like, it's going to be on my birthday. So I said, yes, absolutely. Special birthday magic for Mickey. So thanks for all you do, Mickey. Like Judith was saying, I work for Operation Restoration. We have 15 different programs that provide wraparound reentry services, policy support, bail fund, but we have a whole education department. My particular job is to administer the program inside the Women's Correctional Facility in partnership with Tulane University. We offer a bachelor's degree in social sciences, and we just had our first graduate. She was released a little over a year ago, and she added some extra classes, and she was able to graduate ahead of her cohort, and we had a big celebration for her earlier this month. It was very exciting. And her cohort is going to be graduating at the end of this summer. So our program is up and running. We have 2 cohorts. We're hoping to add a third. And we're involved in as much higher education stuff as we possibly can. So I'm going to go over, I've got a really brief PowerPoint here that I'm going to talk through, and then I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie and Javian, who can really talk about the work that they're doing as well. And also a shout out to Javian. This is actually his PowerPoint. We presented it to another organization, and I just kind of shortened it up a little bit for this. But basically what we have is a task force, and that is something that is authorized by the legislature. Can you all see that? I switched over. Am I still sharing my screen, Mickey? It was on there. No. Okay. Let me go back to, it was on there earlier. I apologize. My computer crashed this morning and I have taken over my husband's for this hour and a half while he's on his lunch break. Let me see. And I have now lost my PowerPoint. I'm a little unfamiliar with his computer.
Tracy, do you want me to pull up the presentation and
Yeah,
we can
if
kinda
you
talk?
could,
Sure.
I apologize. My husband
Oh.
uses these hot corners and it's bouncing all over the place and I can't seem to grab it. But I sent it to Stephanie ahead of time because I was in a total panic this morning when my computer crashed. And then also I had the time wrong because we're central to Eastern, and then I went back to Eastern and I scared poor Stephanie too, who was like, trying to hop on a little early. I blame the 10 inches of snow that hit New Orleans last week and really just changed our world around for a minute there. It was very surreal and beautiful and amazing. And for those of you in northern states where you have to actually operate in the snow and the ice, good on you. Our entire city shut down and it turned into a snow play date. Everywhere you went, there were just people all over the place throwing snow and playing in it. And it was really something crazy. I still don't see it, Stephanie. Is it being shared? There it is. Thank you so much. All right, so the Louisiana Prison Education Task Force overview, we can go to the next slide. This was submitted by Representative Amy Freeman in the 2023 regular session. She's also a professor at Tulane University. And so she wanted to ask the legislature to actually kind of do a deep dive into some of the data and bring a bunch of, interested parties together to talk about higher education in prison. And so it was intended as a study of the landscape and efficacy of educational programming in Louisiana correctional facilities. And I have to say, we'll take a look at all the membership in a minute. I think one of the best things of this task force was bringing all these people together to start talking about higher education. And right now, we are currently looking for funding to have like an innovation convening for task force members so that we can continue the momentum that we got through this task force. Next slide. So here's our task force membership, and you can see it's a lot of big players. We had Department of Public Safety, Sheriff's Association, we had formerly incarcerated individuals, corrections education providers, the Louisiana Workforce Commission, the Governor's Office, Louisiana Community and Technical Colleges, Daughters Beyond nonprofits, Daughters Beyond Incarceration, Vote. And then, of course, Tulane University, the director of our program from Tulane was the chair of the task force, Loyola, a couple of community colleges, LSU, Southern, and then Vera, which was also really helpful. And we had mostly Zoom meetings, but we did come together a few times for in-person meetings. And I feel like coming together with all of these important players for higher education in prison was just tremendously beneficial. And I am hoping we can keep the momentum going. Let's go on to the next. So this was the requirements for the reporting. How many programs we had by facility, scores and GPAs. By the way, our incarcerated students have like an average of a 3.5 GPA across the state. It's pretty impressive. Number and type of credentials that are offered, experience, credentials, and turnover rate of program instructors, academic and career advice, restrictions on participation, program attrition, post-release education enrollment and vocational certificate, employment, and other indicators of success. And what we were able to determine actual recidivism rates for in comparison to those who had higher education and those who didn't. And it was significantly better. And it was just really great to see all this information get gathered in one place. And because the legislature was requiring it through the process of a task force, the education department of the DOC worked to get all of these numbers. And I know Stephanie is going to put the actual task force in the chat for us. Thank you, Stephanie, to all my computer problems. I had everything all set up and then it just went kaplooey. So, but we were able to gather all this data, which helps us as we are trying to expand higher education programs in the state of Louisiana. And as we are trying to move towards Pell in Louisiana. And also, while we are trying to combat a lot of draconian criminal justice policies here in Louisiana, to be able to have this type of conversation and to be able to provide the data to the legislature to say this actually works. I know that I have participated in various ways for our students for parole hearings, and I have been bringing the task force and submitting it to the parole board, highlighting recidivism rate reduction, and using that as an additional argument to say, hey, our students are in a really great position right now to be released. They've got a lot of support from the university. They have a lot of support from the nonprofit organization, and we're going to be able to help them transition successfully back into the community. And now we have state data that actually supports that. Okay, next slide. So these were the recommendations after the task force came together, 2023 and 2024. And our number one recommendation was improving data infrastructure. That was primarily based on the fact that there was all the funding coming in from the broadband legislation. And that's coming in now. And so we're trying to do our best to identify the best ways that we can use that and try and provide, a more informed conversation about that. We also wanted to identify barriers and opportunities for students, prioritize education access for local facilities. Louisiana has the highest rate of people incarcerated in jails than other states. I think like 53% of our inmates are located in jails, even though many of them should be going into prison facilities that offer more opportunities, educational opportunities in classes. So that's a real problem, is they get stuck in the jails here for very long times as a holding pathway, because the state gives the sheriffs money to keep them in the jails. And it's just not a great system. We're also trying to create educational pathways suited for all sentences. And I actually had a conversation with Michelle about this in the breakout room, is that our program at Tulane in particular, we are focused on those who are doing long-term and life sentences. A lot of times education opportunities, as everyone here knows, is offered to those who are going to be transitioning back to the community. And we felt that everyone should have access to these opportunities. We recommended that we needed to assess funding barriers and opportunities. And one of the great things that came out of this was a better relationship with the state financial aid office, who has been very supportive and very encouraging, and actually went and looked at our state funding to find out where barriers might exist and which funding is available for students who have felonies, who are on the outside or on the inside. And then we also requested to continue and expand the task force. It's been granted for another year. And like I said, we're looking now for a grant so that we can have like an innovative convening to talk about what we can do with this information and how to go forward. And then we're also trying to address education incentivization challenges. So that can be a lot of different things. Right, next slide. So basically, in the end, this is kind of a summary, the benefits of education in correctional facilities. And this is what we're trying to share. This is a lot of the things I was trying to share with the parole board, but also with community organizations. We shared this with a reentry coalition for, preparing for the legislative session. But we found that here in Louisiana, we can decrease the likelihood of recidivism by 43 or 48% with post-secondary education. here in Louisiana, and that we increase employability by 13%. And this is the data that the DOC collected. And of course, it has a positive impact on the individual and the community, and that we increase familial and communal bonds. We kind of ended the task force on that, so that people, I can't imagine the legislators are actually looking at the 20-some pages that this document is. So you want to try and get the information in a condensed way so that they see the summaries and they can take that information from a few bullet points. I just saw somebody posted that JSTOR is coming into jail spaces. We just got JSTOR in our program last semester. So that was really exciting. A lot of glitches, we're still working through it, but it's better access for our students. Okay, next slide. So this is the last slide I have. I just wanted to give you guys just a quick snapshot of Louisiana and the programs that we have. As we move towards Pell, I'm looking personally at policies that I think will reduce administrative costs and difficulties of establishing more programs inside the prisons. In particular, I would like to start just being able to give our students who go into segregation access to their school materials so that they can continue on with their classes. And that's, I'm really hoping, I'm working with this reentry organization. And because we were able to gather all this information from the task force, my hope is that we can bring a bill to the legislature this session to see if we can force the DOCs, the different prison and jail facilities, to give students access to their educational materials while they're in segregation. So we'll see how that goes. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Stephanie. Stephanie has been involved with the task force from the very beginning and is often my go-to for everything higher ed in prison.
Seems like we have a hand up from Beth.
Oh. Hey, Beth.
Hey, Tracy. Thank you. This is great information. I will make this quick because I have so many questions and I don't want to take up other people's time. But I don't know how many facilities in Louisiana that are devoted specifically to women. Like, my question basically is, were you able to do this work and include both men's and women's facilities?
Yes.
Okay.
In the task force, all the facilities and all the programs, the DOC put a list together, and that is in the task force. Louisiana essentially has one facility for women specifically, although there was a flood a few years ago and they've been spread around the state while they've been renovating the property. They're expected to move all women back into the facility this year.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for me before I turn it on to Stephanie?
Yes, but I will wait.
Okay. All right, Stephanie. Good morning. Good
Good
afternoon.
morning. Yeah. I won't take up too much time and I can just leave it open for questions as well. But just to pick up on a couple of points, on the data infrastructure, one of the reasons that was so high on the recommendation list is that some of that information that was required by the task force legislation was not the easiest to get. And I don't know that some of that information ever really did get published, especially around post-release outcomes, which I don't think anybody in this room will find super surprising, since that was one of the main concerns about Pell legislation, is getting some of those post-release outcomes. But I would also just second what Tracy said about it was definitely good to get all of this information in one place in terms of a task force report, but really I think a huge value of the task force itself was just getting all of these people in the same room and getting people in conversation. I don't think that what we came up with was anywhere near what we wanted it to be in terms of the information that we could collect, but it was a starting point to realize that we couldn't collect some of that information, or we weren't able to do that. So I also think that this task force has just been really important in trying to move Louisiana forward and trying to get more higher education into correctional facilities here.
Javian, did you have any comments?
No, I'm just here more for support, and if folks have questions that I may answer, I can answer it. I'm here. But I think some folks did have some questions, so we can definitely address those now.
Okay, great. I'm gonna look in the chat.
I will wait. I will wait because I always have questions. So if other people like Barbie, go ahead.
Thank you, thank you. Hey y'all. Were data sharing agreements necessary or governed by the legislation over this task force?
Well,
No, there weren't.
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
No, not to my knowledge. No one asked for that. When we had the requirements corrections, they use a system called Cajun, so they were able to pull a lot of those. Yeah, I forget, it's an acronym that stands for something and I don't remember what. But so they're able to pull a lot of those things in the aggregate. So I think because it's aggregate information and not individual personal information, there wasn't necessarily the need for that. But I guess maybe if there were, if it was like a less cooperative and collaborative relationship, there might have been some issues there. Sorry, Tracy, didn't mean to talk over you.
How long did it take you to create this collaboration? Like, what was the, from the initial conversation to actually meeting, what did that look like?
Honestly, Beth, I can't answer that because when I came in, I came in right as the task force was being impaneled.
Okay.
And so I don't know the history. Stephanie, do you know the history?
Yeah, so it's a little bit I'll say on our end at the Jesuit Social Research Institute at Loyola, we sort of found out about the legislation as it was being proposed. And so some of the pieces around it were not necessarily informed by people doing education on the ground, which again, I'm sure that everyone in this room has had that experience of legislation happening that isn't necessarily informed by what's happening on the ground. So that happened during the 2023 legislative session. And then it did, from my memory, and I'd have to check with Marco, who's Tracy's colleague and mine at Tulane, but it did take a little while to get everybody on that list of people together. And I'll also say some people on that list were not very active participants. Some were more active than others. There were some colleges and universities on that list that did not show up to task force meetings. So it did take a little bit for it to happen. I want to say maybe our first one was a few months into 2024. I don't think we kicked it off right in January. And then I will also say it took a long time to get that task force report together. There were so many times that we were just going back and forth trying to get information, and finally just had to put the report out without those post-release outcomes. And just for this group to know, I checked in recently with the community college board about whether they were able to get that information, and they said basically their data infrastructure was not set up in order to get that information from the past, and so they're trying to work on improving data infrastructure to be able to get it going forward. I know one of their solutions has been to get a code in Banner to make sure that all the community colleges are using the same code to report on their incarcerated students. Again, not to get too deep in the weeds, but I'll also say that this task force comes at a time when there's renewed interest in prison education in Louisiana, not primarily because of Pell, but more because the community college system received a $5 million allocation from the state legislature to be able to go back into prisons. A lot of the community colleges sort of went away for a while because they lost a lot of funding to be able to do prison education. But that resurgence in funding created a lot more interest. And so I think that and Pell coming back was able to move some things forward. And now I've just started talking and lost what the actual question was, but maybe someone will get me back on track.
It's okay. You answered it. I'll step down for a sec. Thanks.
Then I
From
see.
Esther. Mhm.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if Judith still had a question. Thank you all for your presentation and for all of the many ways that you made this task force happen. I've been very involved with the creation and then work of the Illinois Higher Education and Prison Task Force. So I know how much work goes into it and all the work that it takes to keep it moving forward. It's really exciting that you guys were able to secure a continuation of the work. That's been a challenge for us in Illinois. One of the great things that came out of the Illinois task force were several legislative proposals in line with the recommendations of the task force. One of which was a data collection bill that passed and went into effect early last year. So I was just curious if there are any legislative proposals that have come out of the task force or even anything you would like to see be drafted and put forward now that there seems to be more interest and energy around this issue in your state. And of course, if I could be a resource, we did a lot of research on data collection in states across the country. Would love to support all that you're doing.
Well, I'd like to start with saying, yes, I would love to hear more about your data collection legislation. That sounds really helpful. I know Stephanie, and I'll let her talk about this. She's been doing a little bit more work on the broadband. And I've been working with the Reentry Coalition to try and get materials into segregation. So we're hoping to have some legislation to go forward with that. This is a financial, it's a budget year for the Louisiana legislature, so their bills are limited. So we're trying to figure out how all of that is going to play out and what we can actually impact. And with that, Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything to say about the broadband.
Yeah, I'll address the legislation piece and then the broadband piece as well. I think, and I'll just speak for myself here, but one thing I've been thinking about is how much of this needs to be addressed through legislation and how much of it can be addressed as policy change at the level of corrections that wouldn't require legislative permission, so to speak. As Tracy referenced, it might not be the easiest thing for us to do at this particular juncture. Although I will say there has been support for education in prisons, even at the state legislative level. There was a bill last session to make sure that there was at least high school equivalency and vocational or workforce training in every correctional facility in Louisiana, which, as Tracy referenced, 53% of the population is in local jails. And so when that legislation was brought, there was someone in corrections who came to the table and said, if we're talking about state facilities, because Louisiana has 8 state facilities, then we're in compliance. But if we're talking about local facilities, then we're going to need a little bit more time to make that happen. So I think that's one thing that we're trying to discern is what needs to take place legislatively, but then what can also sort of be negotiated internally with corrections to make some of these things possible. And then in terms of broadband, I think probably everybody here knows about the Digital Equity Act and that incarcerated people are a covered population in that federal legislation. I think that Louisiana is the first state to actually get its state allocation for the Digital Equity Act. And our corrections department is going to have a request for proposals in April about how we could start to use that funding to give better access to incarcerated students in terms of digital skills and access to technology, things like that. So I think we have some real challenges in Louisiana, but we also have some momentum going that I think can get us where we need to go.
Can any of you talk about what you were possibly, I mean, I know there are lots of obstacles and challenges, but was there anything that you were particularly surprised by, whether, positive or, more challenging as part of the process?
And say, for me, what was surprising was was DOC's want to work with us. It was surprising, but I think, yeah, I mean, it was positive, right? I mean, oftentimes we have this sort of, feeling, and we have these experiences where they're not as hospitable, right, to nonprofits or organizations who are working on behalf of folks who are incarcerated. And so to see that they were willing to work and sort of like work with us was really good. Of course, that comes with its challenges in some sense, but just to see that in some sense, like the education directors and the folks who's in education wanted to see these programs up and running and wanted to see them, in some ways, be positioned in a better way for folks. That was really great to see. But yeah, if anyone else have anything else.
I do have a question. Florida has a lot in common with Louisiana when it comes to supporting the system or lack thereof. So I'm excited and happy to see how Louisiana has come along. And you guys put on your slides, number one, if you're going to be sharing those slides. I know people are going to be really interested and excited to be able to access those slides. But number two, you said you had on your slides that you do online, in person, and hybrid when it comes to the program delivery. I wanted to know a little bit more about it, like what's been easiest to implement, what's been more acceptable for both the institution and the facilities, because I feel like we're behind on the game here in Florida, and I really want to start off, making it as easy as possible for things to get started. And also I'm glad to hear about jails, because that's a big problem here too. We have people sitting in jail for years. They're supposed to be there a certain period of time, but they end up being there 3-4 years and not getting access to any type of resource or services. So I wanted to know a little bit more about what's become the easiest way or format to just implement something for our students.
What was the first question again, Judith?
I think it was for the last. I think you were speaking in reference to the last slide. So those the delivery methods were from different institutions. So as you see on the last slide, it's not up right now, but Ashland University has online and a technical college. So our programs, Tulane and Loyola. Well, Tulane is hybrid. Is that right? You may can speak more on that. But Loyola's program is in person. But I'll let you speak more on it, Tracy, on the hybrid. If Judah, if that's what you're speaking more of, to kind of get up and running.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit to the Tulane program, but I also want to give a shout out to Stephanie Gaskill again, who I think really was a key player in moving a lot of technology into the prison during COVID. Is that correct, Stephanie? I feel like you were at OR with the Tulane program in that time. I believe that's where we
Yeah,
get our
I
Chromebook.
I can't really take credit for that. I can say that for Tulane's program, okay. So to describe the tech landscape in Louisiana, in some ways, I feel very grateful for what is available because in both the Tulane and Loyola programs, every student has a laptop and they can take those laptops to their dorm and they have Wi-Fi so that a student who is in their dorm can write me a message at 10 o'clock at night and I can respond and they can see my response. We can have assignments and upload assignments and there can be pretty regular communication in that way. And we have a learning management system, but there's two big limitations. One is that it's not as though a professor on campus can just take we use Canvas at Loyola, and I think at Tulane, Canvas is the learning management system too. It's not like an instructor can just import their course. We've got to take every single file and turn it into a PDF or an MP4. So there's that limitation, and it's not as though that they can't surf the web. You can't just like go to whatever website you want. And so I would say, I know that in other states, there are computer labs, for example, where people can go and have more open access to the internet. And I think the real challenge for that is just the timing. One of the great things about the laptops that we have is that students can access them at any time. There's no security necessary for them to be able to then access a computer lab or anything like that. But they're also very expensive laptops and we have to pay for them every year. And so I think, again, in some ways, I'm really grateful for the tech capabilities that we have. And as with everything else in prison education, there's always trade-offs. As far as what is, what kind of, I guess, Judith, maybe your question was around like, what is the most acceptable form of programming that corrections will allow into a facility? And I would say they've been pretty open to everything. I remember back when I first started this work, there was a lot of sort of like an uproar in New York about Ashland coming in to the prisons up there. And there was sort of a fear that in-person programming would be pushed out because there was online programming available. And what I always like to say in the Louisiana context is that Ashland was in prisons long before we started doing any programming. And there was still a lot of openness to in-person programming. So my sort of feeling, and this goes to Javian's point as well, is that it's always been a pretty collaborative, cooperative relationship with the education staff at Department of Corrections. I think that there's sort of a recognition that different kinds of programs are going to be suited to different kinds of populations in the prison. Like they've always been looking for people to serve students who are serving longer sentences. So that has been sort of outreach on corrections part to see who can be serving people who have these longer sentences. So again, Louisiana is not a utopia, obviously, but I think that there is a lot of openness to having a variety of different kinds of programs, from liberal arts degrees to technical diplomas and associate degrees and things like that. So I feel like we do have good cooperative, collaborative relationships that allow us to do quite a bit here.
Thank you for that. And I always refer Florida to other states so that they can hopefully follow suit at some point. And I know that Louisiana has been, it's very similar in a lot of areas. So giving that reference and letting them know, hey, you guys, we're behind the game here. We're hopeful that more doors would be opening and they're be more receptive. Beth, you have one more question, then we'll just conclude.
Yes. My last question is, Tracy, you had mentioned wanting to do some fundraising. What would you say are the top 3 things that you're wanting to fund initially, like, out of the gate? I mean, what are the top 3 priorities?
Well, currently we have applied for funding, or I should say Marco has through Tulane. There's an innovation grant. And the idea is really just to pay for a half day or a couple of half day sessions with all of the task force members, really just to brainstorm what to get everybody back in the room in an in-person environment, to let those juices flow and everybody talk about the troubles they have, what legislation would be available, where should we maybe change policies. I find sometimes it's difficult to find out if the policy is a DOC policy, if it's a verbal policy, if it's something that's only happening at my facility. Is it a new security change, right? I find a lot of times people, the wardens don't even have the answers to that. Sometimes things get done because that's just the way they've always been done. And so, I'd really just love to be able to get everybody in the room at one time, once or twice, with a nice luncheon, and figure all that out. So that's why we're talking about it as like an innovative convening. We've talked about maybe taking the show on the road, being able to talk about some of these task force objectives to like church groups and other nonprofits, and like we're doing right here today. When Javian first put the PowerPoint together, we talked to our reentry coalition, which was, a bunch of local nonprofits dealing with reentry, so that we can help craft some potential legislation. And it's just it's a great meeting point to have this task force, to get people together time and time again, talking about problems, challenges, and solutions, with producing, with creating higher ed inside carceral settings. So I don't know that we have a big goal or an agenda right now, Beth. I think that, getting everybody together seems to be one of the best things. And I want to talk about just one thing that I know came up from this when I first came on. We started talking to the Louisiana State Financial Aid Office. And through that relationship, there was somebody in the office who was very interested in helping our program. So you find those people who are like, I want this to be a big part of my job. This is really special. And because she was so interested, she's been working a lot closer with the higher education programs and helped us identify and understand state financial aid. So it's really, I think it's almost more about legislation building. But I'm always looking for creative ways that we can possibly use this task force to start these conversations.
Yeah, and you all have done a fantastic job. And when I say take the show on the road, definitely the stuff that you're talking about, I would totally support you in any way that I can doing that. But it occurs to me that the work that you're doing, the work that Ashton is talking about in Illinois, if there's a way that we could kind of bring some of the states together that have been moving forward with these kind of collaborations and moving legislation and policy pieces forward for the other states that haven't gotten there that far, what a fantastic convening that could be. So I was just saying, if you're thinking about looking for funding, I'd be willing to help you with that if you're thinking about doing something from that larger perspective.
That would be great. And Ashton, I just saw where you posted that you guys built a relationship with somebody in the lieutenant governor's office. And I think that's it. When you bring a bunch of representatives, either you start to build and foster their interest in these programs, or they come already with an interest, and then you can identify those people and build those coalitions and those relationships. And so, we keep finding different ways that we can utilize the task force.
Right, guys, we're gonna have to wrap it up. This has been extremely informative. And once again, I thank the speakers for this great presentation. I hope that we are able to share it with the rest of the participants. I also want to remind the NCHAP conference is closed for registration. It's already sold out, but we still have the Horizon Conference if you're interested on that. I'm going to waive on the federal and the subcommittee updates, but please, please, please consider joining. Again, these are conversations that we want to make sure that we have not only at the federal level, but also at the state level. So the more states that we have represented, the more complete this conversation will be, and the more support we can provide for those who are actually doing the work in the grounds. So please consider joining our subcommittees, federal, state, even media and messaging events. We are hoping to have another Hill Day advocacy event for this year. So consider that as well. And for sure, as everybody knows, fundraising part of it is a big component of all of the work that needs to get done. With that, I thank you for being here, for being present, and I thank you guys for this wonderful presentation and the sharing of information.